So today is Tuesday, December 26, 2023. This is the Stronghold Digital Mining Daily Update. People sometimes may wonder, why does this guy only ever talk about Stronghold Digital Mining? Doesn't he know that there are bunches of publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies out there? And I can talk about all these different companies and get into all their metrics, talk about, what kind of exahash they've got, what kind of Bitcoin mining equipment they've got, where they're building data centers. Yeah, I hear you. The thing is, none of those other companies have anything near where I live. I live in Pennsylvania. I'm in the PJM, PP&L portion of the grid, which happens to be home to not only Panther Creek, which is a Stronghold Digital Mining mine waste to energy facility, as well as a Bitcoin mining facility, but it's also home to what was referenced in the Stronghold Digital Mining IPO materials as the third plant. That third plant is a mine waste to power facility that has been a part of my life since as far back as I can pretty much remember. The idea of cleaning up mine waste and in so doing, turning that mine waste into electricity is not something that's new to me. What is very new and different and intriguing is the level of ingenuity that I'd argue started in Western Pennsylvania at what is now a Stronghold Digital Mining mine waste to energy facility called Scrubgrass. And I'm thinking specifically of one engineer before Stronghold Digital Mining even existed, before Bill Spence had ever even purchased the plant. One engineer and a small team of individuals who decided that they were going to try to do something to rescue their mine waste to energy facility so that it wouldn't go the path of extinction. Because you see, here in Pennsylvania, there's this thing called Marcellus Shale and to some extent Utica Shale. And, natural gas prices, which have a tendency to essentially be the barometer of sorts as to which way energy prices are going to go. And I'm simplifying things by describing it that way. But, we saw a flood of all of this cheap natural gas. So energy prices just really went down. So you had these merchant plants, which were no longer, right? And by merchant plants, I mean mine waste to energy facilities that might have been operating under power purchase agreements, right? Suddenly, they no longer had that one steady customer. So they had to figure out how to survive in a world where you're basically selling into the open market, where grid prices can change at any point in time. So thanks to this one engineer and a handful of individuals working at Scrubgrass, really the whole team that was left. I mean, there were quite a number of people working at Scrubgrass. By the time things really started to look pretty rough, those numbers had really gone down, and it could have gone to zero, I think not once, but twice. If I'm not mistaken, those letters had been drafted saying, we're just going to put a nail in this thing, and that's it. It's done. It's over. It's cooked. It's finished. But it wasn't meant to be. One engineer and a small team of dedicated individuals, before Stronghold Digital Mining ever existed, made a decision. They made a decision to do something to help save their mine waste to energy facility. Then Bill Spence buys Scrubgrass out in Western Pennsylvania. And then the question becomes, hey, what can we do to create an alternative use for the electricity that we're generating? Because after all, we're generating this electricity, and yes, it's great that we know our costs and we know that we can sell into the grid when it's appropriate to do so. But what if there were some other use for this electricity? And so then the idea came about to try mining Bitcoin. One thing led to another. And before long, Stronghold Digital Mining, as we know it today, was in existence. It started off just with scrubgrass out in western Pennsylvania. That's a mine waste to energy facility. Then in November of 2021, the Panther Creek mine waste to energy facility was acquired by Stronghold Digital Mining. And I am convinced that if we would have seen the price of Bitcoin, this is back in late 2021, right? If we would have seen it continue to go up from, say, roughly 70,000 to maybe 90,000 to 120,000 to 150,000, and if the market would have continued to essentially reward companies in the publicly traded Bitcoin mining ecosystem that were in hyper growth mode, then this mine waste to energy facility, which I have seen almost every single day of my life for quite some time, would have become part of the Stronghold Digital Mining family of mine waste to energy facilities. Fate had some different ideas. And from about early 2022 until today, we've been collectively, right? Anybody who's been involved with the Bitcoin mining ecosystem, or even just Bitcoin itself, right? We've all experienced a very challenging crypto winter. Now, at long last, it appears as if though the tide has begun to change. I still hesitate to say that we have emerged fully from a crypto winter, but I think if one were to look out into the distant horizon far enough, I think we're starting to see some definite signs of life. And certainly in recent months, we've seen not just some signs of life, but some real explosions of activity. For example, thanks to the individuals who manage and operate a website called hashrateindex.com, we can look to see what percentage of the block rewards, and I'm kind of simplifying this, what percentage, right, of the block rewards is now comprised of Bitcoin transaction fees. And since about the beginning of November till now, that has gone from maybe like 2%, maybe 3%, essentially a somewhat de minimis amount, to numbers that really boggle the mind. I mean, at a bare minimum, we're almost talking about 10% and higher, in some cases, dramatically higher. And I don't just mean for, brief moments of time, but really like some sustained periods of really, really useful transaction fees associated with blocks that are being generated as part of the process, essentially, of mining Bitcoin, for, again, in layman's terms. So you look at the path and the journey that Stronghold Digital Mining has been on. See, I can't speak about other companies because, see, I care very deeply about the environmental work that Stronghold Digital Mining and other similarly situated mine waste to energy facilities here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the work that they do means a lot to me. I'm really, really close to Panther Creek, which I had the incredible privilege of being able to visit on Tuesday, December 5th of this year. That was such an overwhelmingly interesting and amazing visit that I, as of yet, have really, not really been able to conjure the right words to talk about it, but I'm getting really close to feeling as if though I'm comfortable enough to describe a little bit of what I experienced there. It was truly like an extraordinary experience, to put it mildly. Truly, truly extraordinary. So yeah, why don't I talk about every other Bitcoin mining company and just kind of talk about them all collectively and maybe get into the stats of one company or the other, or this, enterprise or another. It's because ultimately I think my fate in some way or another was somehow destined to cross paths with this particular Bitcoin mining company, Stronghold Digital Mining, a company when I first really started to take a close look at what was going on, there was nothing but bad news out there. I saw nothing but negativity on YouTube. I saw a lot of despondency. I saw a lot of just downright depression almost amongst a lot of fellow co-owners and shareholders of the business, for understandable reasons. This has not been an easy journey. And I've always been incredibly sensitive to some of the hardship and pain that a lot of the original investors in this company, going back to the IPO in October of 2021, I am very sensitive to that path because it has not been a very pleasant path. And I've been very transparent and open about talking about just how jarring and difficult and painful, financially painful, if not emotionally and mentally painful, of a journey and a path it has been for those original investors in this business. But now, I do believe that we are starting to see concrete evidence of a meaningful turnaround. We've seen a turnaround taking place with regard to Stronghold Digital Mining, the company, right? In terms of operations, cost containment, attempting to enhance revenue, right? We've seen that taking place over this past year, as well as even last year. An incredible deleveraging. I mean, this business went from came out in the IPO, it was like hyper growth mode. Wall Street wants to see us go from 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to a bazillion exahash. That's what's being rewarded. You can't find any Bitcoin mining machines. It was just a very, very challenging period of time, to say the least. Then you go from hyper growth mode to suddenly having to figure out how to delever the business to survive a brutal, absolutely brutal crypto winter. Which Stronghold Digital Mining, a lot of people thought this company will not make it. The company made it. Was it easy? No. Was it painful? Yes. But the company is still here. And now, I think really surpassing a lot of expectations, Stronghold Digital Mining has essentially innovated so incredibly that we are actually slated as a company to have what could very well be one of the largest, if not the absolute largest, direct air capture to mineralization project in the United States of America up and running by 2024. That's next year. Okay, that's a really big deal. Capturing carbon from the atmosphere, a really big deal. A really big deal. And I don't just mean it's a really big deal from a scientific perspective, not just from a, hey, let's do well by the environment perspective, but perhaps most important to those who are co-owners of the business and shareholders of the business, right? It has the potential to be incredibly lucrative for this business. And it's a truly differentiated line of revenue that doesn't involve buying Bitcoin mining machines, looking at a halving, looking at a Bitcoin mining ecosystem that can be very, very, very challenging sometimes, right? So direct air carbon, direct air capture of carbon in the atmosphere, that's going to reduce our net cost of power. That's a really good thing. Hey, to the extent Stronghold Digital Mining is going to selectively invest, right, to upgrade certain Bitcoin mining machines within its fleet of about 3 exahash of wholly owned, directly owned Bitcoin mining machines, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, we've got about an exahash of Bitcoin mining machines that are essentially owned by Win-Win Hosting Plus partners, Foundry, Canaan, of course, being the very first company, if I'm not mistaken, to ever create an ASIC Bitcoin mining machine. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. So, our basket of assets are looking really good going into the halving. It appears increasingly likely that the United States Securities and Exchange Commission may very well approve a spot Bitcoin ETF here in the United States. That's going to be a very powerful catalyst for the price of Bitcoin going forward. And I do believe we're starting to see some rotation, right? Where money that perhaps had been previously allocated elsewhere is now being allocated to publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies. And furthermore, I think what we're going to start to see is the allocation of funds based on perceived value. Okay? What I mean by that is you take a look at the various publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies out there, and you start to say, okay, as it relates to Bitcoin mining, some are larger companies, some are smaller companies, some have a bazillion exahash, some have less than a bazillion exahash, right? But fundamentally speaking, they all provide a modicum of exposure to Bitcoin mining economics. But then you start looking, right, and you start saying, hey, when we look at this from the perspective of like, hey, what's the valuation relative to the amount of exahash that each company has? Hey, when you look at all these Bitcoin mining companies, are there any that are particularly richly valued at the moment? And are there some companies that are just like they were forgotten, they fell through the cracks, they were ignored, they were overlooked, and they're essentially being given away? And from my perspective, in my opinion, Stronghold Digital Mining, unfortunately, right, is one of those companies that was forgotten. It was overlooked. It was ignored. It was assumed that they somehow didn't even exist, or that if they did exist, they weren't going to exist for much longer. But yet, this company has defied all of those negative expectations and is not only still here, but is arguably in far better shape than it has ever been in its entire history as a publicly traded company. We're talking about data centers, both at Scrubgrass and in Panther Creek, that are like packed. You know, I don't even know that there's space for any more Bitcoin mining machines. So at this point, it's more about let's upgrade some of the older machines, the really older ones. Maybe we could selectively put some newer ones in there. That's amazing. We've got the capital, in my opinion, to fully deploy a direct air carbon, I keep saying that, a direct air capture carbon solution, which is going to be an incredible win-win, not just for the environment, but for the company. We're talking about something that's not looking at any sort of halving. These direct air, capture devices. I've studied this very carefully. I'm hard pressed to believe that in a year they need to be thrown away and new ones need to be manufactured. They're not Bitcoin mining machines, which we both know have a tendency to sometimes be somewhat obsolete, functionally obsolete after a couple of years. So that's a really good thing, right? The money that's being spent to deploy this DAC carbon capture solution is money that's not going to necessarily have to be, respent in a relatively short period of time. The amount of money that this project has the potential to pull in is amazing, like legitimately amazing. So Stronghold Digital Mining, relatively speaking, is incredibly, from my perspective, as well as from the perspective of Stronghold Digital Mining itself, dare I say, because there have now been numerous instances within our investor presentations where, as part of the slide deck, we've seen these comparisons, right? Where it's like we're trading at a fraction of the multiple of practically every other company. It's absurd. And I think the market's figuring that out and saying, hey, you know what? I want exposure to Bitcoin mining. Yeah, hey, great. Maybe I prefer being in some of these bigger names, but I'd be out of my mind to overlook this insanely cheap, undervalued company called Stronghold Digital Mining. I should have some exposure there. Because, when you have a company like Compass Point Trading, Research and Trading, and Chase White, right, the coverage analyst, having a price target of $17 a share on Stronghold Digital Mining, that's not me saying that. That's somebody whose professional vocation is researching companies like Stronghold and putting a price target on these companies, right, such as Stronghold, that in the professional estimation of the researcher, it's a number that makes sense. So we're just under $10 a share as of today's close on volume of nearly 3 million shares. We were up, I believe, as high as about $10 and roughly 30 cents a share. So our 52-week high, which was set in April of 2023, this year, is about $12.50. I believe that if we're able to get to that 52-week high, surpass that 52-week high, hold our ground, we have then clear visibility to the $17 price target assigned by Chase White over at Compass Point. If we're able to get to $17, hold that price, get a bit beyond it and above it, we've pretty much got clear sailing to $30 and beyond. That's not hyperbole. Look at a chart, do your own homework, come to your own conclusion. But I mean, objectively speaking, I don't know how else to describe this. This is an incredibly undervalued company, and from my perspective, has been incredibly undervalued. Although, to be fair, here's the little asterisk. Yeah, there always has been and continues to be an element of risk. And I think that's true for just about every company that's publicly traded, be it on NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, or elsewhere. So if you're comfortable with a little bit of risk or a lot of risk, maybe, hey, if you want to be really, really kind of careful with the way you approach things, then assume that there's a ton of risk. But do your homework and then ask yourself, okay, there's a lot of risk, but is the reward sufficient to potentially overcome that tremendous amount of risk? And if the answer is yes, then you've got to be open-minded to at least considering investing in a company like Stronghold Digital Mining. I mean, this is an investment advice. I'm just having a conversation with you as I'd have with anyone else. And we're exchanging ideas. And we're just kind of talking about how we approach shares of a company like this. If I had fresh capital to allocate, which I did about a month ago or so, would I want to invest it in a company like Stronghold Digital Mining? And the answer was yes. At a price under at a price under $4 a share. I think it was like $3.78, I believe. It was the day right before our Q3 2023 investor presentation. And as I said at the time, it took courage, because at some point, I think this isn't so much about, okay, I've read all the reports, I've done all the math, I'm going to keep analyzing this one way or the other. At some point, I think what's ultimately required is courage. The courage to say, you know what, I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to live with that decision. I'm going to have faith in this management team. I'm going to have faith in the research and due diligence I've already done. And I'm going to see what happens over the next several months, if not the next year. Because regardless of which Bitcoin mining company you might happen to be partial towards, I think there's a very fair argument to be made that there's a tsunami of money coming into Bitcoin. And I think just about everybody seems to kind of more or less agree to that. If you got a spot Bitcoin ETF, you're going to see a lot of money coming into Bitcoin. And some of the beneficiaries of that will be Bitcoin mining companies, which are very, very, very heavily levered to hash price. So then you got to say to yourself, hey, on a relative valuation, perspective, which of these publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies maybe have some catching up to do, in terms of their valuation, in terms of their stock price. And from my perspective, the top candidate as it relates to having to play some catch up is Stronghold Digital Mining. You think $9, $10, $11 is expensive? It's not. It really isn't. This company, from my perspective, should really be closer to $30 a share. I've said this before. I'm not just saying it because, the stock kind of started going up now. Hey, so we got to raise the amount of money that we're talking about in terms of a stock price. No, I mean, I've been very, very consistent about this for quite some time. The valuation of this company, just from a market cap, even just an enterprise value perspective, which includes debt, is ridiculously, ridiculously cheap, in my opinion. I think things are starting to turn. It's going to be a process. I don't expect this to go straight up. There are going to be days where we're going to catch our breath. There are probably going to be some setbacks here and there. But ultimately, if our stock is truly starting to turn the corner, we've got to see volume, which we're seeing, and we've got to see volume associated with the price going up. And we're seeing that. Are we going to see that every single trading day from here until the end of 2024? I'm sure a lot of us would hope so, right? But let's keep it real. We're going to have down days. We're going to have up days. We're going to have days and weeks perhaps where we just go sideways. Lord knows many of us have experienced that for quite some time now. Just going sideways, drifting up a little bit, down a bit, sometimes down more than up. And it's been a very, very challenging and patience testing experience, to say the least. But to the extent that you have remained optimistic up until this point, to the extent you have chosen to be great up until this point, and to the extent you have continued to reunite with me, as we've done so many times before up until this point, then I'm asking you to at least consider continuing to be positive, continuing to be great, and to continuing to get together with me, because I really do believe, in my opinion at least, that the very best days for shares of Stronghold Digital Mining are right in front of us. Okay, we'll see each other again really soon.